The morning sun cast long shadows across Maya Chen's cramped San Francisco apartment as she scrolled through her camera roll, searching for the perfect shot from yesterday's Mount Shasta hike. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. This was the routine that paid her bills, finding that one magical image among hundreds that would captivate her 2.3 million Instagram followers. Come on, she muttered, swiping past dozens of scenic shots. The towering peak had been spectacular, shrouded in that mystical fog that made Northern California's most enigmatic mountain seem otherworldly. She'd hiked the Panther Meadows Trail alone, something her manager constantly warned against, but Maya craved the authentic solitude that came through in her photos. She stopped at image 247 of 389. It was a selfie taken near the ancient grove of red firs, about 3 miles up the trail. Maya remembered the moment. She'd been exhausted, sweaty, but the light filtering through the canopy had been absolutely perfect. Her dark hair cascaded over one shoulder, and her expression captured that raw, unfiltered joy she was known for. But as she zoomed in to check the lighting on her face, something in the background made her blood run cold. Standing approximately 30 feet behind her, partially obscured by the massive trunk of a Douglas fir, was a figure. At first glance, it looked like another hiker who had accidentally wandered into her shot, but as Maya enlarged the image, her hands began to tremble. The figure was a woman wearing what appeared to be an elaborate white dress. Not hiking gear, not casual wear, but a formal gown with intricate beading that caught the dappled sunlight. The dress was old-fashioned, with long sleeves and a high neckline that screamed early 20th century. The woman's hair was styled in victory rolls, and even through the pixelated zoom, Maya could see she was young, probably in her early 20s. "What the hell?" Maya whispered to her empty apartment. She remembered that section of trail vividly. It had been completely deserted. She'd chosen that spot specifically because there were no other hikers around. She'd wanted to capture the solitude, the connection between herself and the ancient forest. There had been no woman in a wedding dress anywhere near her. Maya grabbed her laptop and uploaded the photo, opening it in Photoshop to examine it more closely. She adjusted the contrast and brightness, sharpening the background until every detail became crystal clear. The woman wasn't just wearing any white dress, it was undeniably a wedding gown, complete with what looked like a long veil trailing behind her. The strangest part wasn't the anachronistic clothing, or the fact that Maya had no memory of seeing her. It was the woman's face. Even at this distance, even through the shadows of the forest, there was something haunting about her expression. She wasn't looking at the camera or at Maya. Instead, her gaze seemed fixed on something beyond the frame, something that filled her face with an emotion Maya couldn't quite identify. Longing, maybe, or desperation. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend and photographer, Jake Martinez. "Post something already. Your engagement is down 12% this week." She stared at the screen, then back at the mysterious photo. Every instinct told her to delete it, to choose one of the dozens of normal hiking shots instead. But something about the image was magnetic. It had that rare quality that made people stop scrolling, the kind of viral potential that could skyrocket her follower count. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she crafted the caption, "Sometimes the mountain shows you things you weren't meant to see." Caught this mysterious figure during yesterday's solo hike at Mount Shasta. Anyone else getting serious supernatural vibes? Mount Shasta, unexplained mysteries, solo hiker, Northern California, supernatural. Maya hesitated for another moment, studying the woman's face one more time. There was something deeply unsettling about those eyes, even at this resolution. They seemed to hold secrets, pain, and a kind of otherworldly knowledge that made Maya's skin crawl, but she hit post anyway. Within minutes, the comments started flooding in. "OMG, is that a ghost? Fake, obviously photoshopped. That's terrifying, Maya. Mount Shasta is known for paranormal activity. Delete this and run." By lunch, the photo had 50,000 likes. By dinner, it was trending on TikTok with the hashtag #UnMountShastaGhost. Maya's follower count climbed steadily as paranormal enthusiasts, skeptics, and casual observers shared the image across every platform. But it wasn't until Dr. James Crawford saw the photo that things got really interesting. Crawford was hunched over his laptop in his cluttered office at UC Berkeley, where he served as an adjunct professor of anthropology with a very unofficial specialty in paranormal investigation. He'd been tagged in the post by one of his graduate students, who knew about his research into Mount Shasta's mysterious phenomena. The moment Crawford saw the figure in the background, He nearly choked on his coffee. He'd seen that face before, in a faded newspaper clipping from 1920, in a missing persons report that had never been solved, in a photograph that hung in the Siskiyou County Historical Museum. The woman in Maya Chen's selfie was Helena Whitmore, the bride who had vanished without a trace over a century ago, and according to every record Crawford had ever found, she should have been dead for more than 100 years. Sarah Whitmore was cataloguing 19th-century land deeds in the basement archives of the Dunsmuir Historical Society when her phone exploded with notifications. As the great-great-niece of the town's most famous missing person, she'd grown accustomed to the occasional ghost hunter or paranormal enthusiast reaching out about Helena's disappearance. But this was different. Dozens of messages, tags, and missed calls, all pointing to the same viral Instagram post. Her hands shook as she opened Maya Chen's photo on her cracked phone screen. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the cramped archive room, filled with yellowing documents and musty filing cabinets. Sarah had to brace herself against a metal shelf as she zoomed in on the figure in the background. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty basement. It was Helena. There was no doubt in Sarah's mind. She'd spent years studying every photograph, every newspaper clipping, every scrap of evidence related to her ancestor's mysterious disappearance. She knew Helena's face better than her own, the delicate cheekbones, the way her dark hair caught the light, the particular tilt of her head that suggested both confidence and vulnerability. But this was impossible. Helena had vanished on June 15, 1920, just hours before her wedding to railroad heir Thomas Ashworth. The entire town had searched for weeks. Bloodhounds had tracked her scent to the base of Mount Shasta before losing it completely, as if she'd simply evaporated into thin air. Sarah fumbled through the filing cabinet until she found the folder she'd been carrying around for 15 years, her personal collection of Helena's case. With trembling fingers, she pulled out the original wedding portrait taken just days before the disappearance. Helena stood radiant in her custom-made gown, imported from Paris specifically for the ceremony. The intricate beadwork, the high lace collar, the way the silk caught the photographer's flash. It was identical to what the figure in Maya's photo was wearing. Her phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed a Berkeley area code. "Sarah Whitmore?" The voice was deep, scholarly, with a hint of urgency. "Yes, who is this?" "Dr. James Crawford, UC Berkeley. I study unexplained phenomena, particularly those related to Mount Shasta. I believe we need to talk about Maya Chen's photograph." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "You've seen it? I've been researching your great-great-aunt's case for over a decade. Miss Whitmore, I don't think this is a hoax or a coincidence. I think Helena is trying to communicate something." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself driving her beat-up Honda toward Berkeley, Dr. Crawford's address scribbled on a post-it note stuck to her dashboard. She'd called in sick to her job at the Historical Society, a decision that would have seemed insane that morning, but now felt absolutely necessary. Crawford's office was exactly what she'd expected. Towers of books threatening to topple over, maps of Northern California covered in red pins, and dozens of photographs documenting unexplained phenomena throughout the region. The man himself was younger than she'd anticipated, probably in his early 40s, with prematurely grey hair and intense green eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail. "Thank you for coming," he said, clearing a chair for her to sit. "I know this must be overwhelming." "I've been researching Helena's disappearance my entire adult life," Sarah replied, settling into the chair. "My family has always believed something supernatural happened to her. The timing, the location, the complete lack of physical evidence, none of it makes sense from a conventional perspective." Crawford nodded, pulling out a thick manila folder. "Mount Shasta has been the site of unexplained disappearances for over 2 centuries. The indigenous Wintu people have stories about the mountain that date back generations, warnings about certain areas where time moves differently, where people can step through what they call thin places between worlds." He spread out a map of the mountain, marked with dozens of red X's. "These are documented disappearances since 1850. Notice the pattern?" Sarah leaned forward, studying the markings. Most were clustered around the same area, the ancient grove where Maya had taken her selfie. They're all in the same general vicinity, within a 2-mile radius of Panther Meadows, specifically near the old-growth forest. And here's the thing that convinced me Helena's case was special. Crawford pulled out a photograph that made Sarah gasp. It was a group photo from a 1958 camping trip, showing a family of 5 posing near a campfire. But in the background, barely visible among the trees, was the unmistakable silhouette of a woman in a long white dress. The Morrison family disappeared 3 days after this photo was taken, Crawford explained. Only their 8-year-old daughter survived, found wandering the base of the mountain with no memory of what happened. But before the family went missing, little Lucy Morrison told park rangers she'd seen the sad bride lady watching them from the forest. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Helena has been appearing to people for decades. That's my theory. But never this clearly, and never in a photograph that's gone viral. Something's changed, Sarah. Something's drawing her back to our world more strongly than ever before. Crawford opened his laptop and pulled up Maya Chen's Instagram profile. The photo now had over 800,000 likes and had been shared across every social media platform. The comments ranged from skeptical, debunking attempts to terrified accounts from other Mount Shasta hikers who claimed they'd seen similar figures. "We need to contact Maya Chen," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If Helena is trying to communicate, Maya might be the key to understanding what she wants." "I agree, but we need to be careful. If my research is correct, people who get too close to solving Helena's mystery have a tendency to disappear themselves." As if summoned by his words, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join me in the trees. The mountain is hungry again. H." Both Sarah and Crawford stared at the message, the temperature in the room seeming to drop 10 degrees. Outside, despite the clear afternoon sky, they could hear the distant rumble of thunder rolling down from the north, from the direction of Mount Shasta. Maya Chen hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her Mount Shasta photo had exploded beyond anything she'd ever experienced. 1.2 million likes and climbing, features on paranormal websites, and interview requests from major news outlets. Her follower count had jumped by 400,000 overnight. It was the kind of viral success most influencers could only dream of. So why did she feel like she was living in a nightmare? Her San Francisco apartment, usually her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every shadow seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at it. Every creak of the old building made her jump. And the dreams, God, the dreams were getting worse. The same vision played on repeat every time she closed her eyes. She was standing in that ancient grove again, but this time she wasn't alone. The woman in the wedding dress stood just beyond the tree line, her face clearer than it had been in the photograph. Beautiful but haunting, with dark eyes that held depths of sorrow Maya couldn't comprehend. The woman would mouth words Maya couldn't hear, gesturing frantically toward something deeper in the forest. Then Maya would try to move toward her, but her feet would sink into the forest floor like quicksand. The woman's expression would shift from pleading to terror, and she'd begin backing away, shaking her head violently before vanishing completely. Maya would wake up gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat. Her phone rang for the 100th time that morning. Maya glanced at the screen. Another unknown number, probably another journalist or paranormal investigator wanting to interview her. She'd stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize after the 5th person asked if she was willing to participate in a séance. But this caller was persistent. They hung up and immediately called back. Then again. On the 4th call, Maya finally answered. "Maya Chen?" The voice was female, urgent but professional. "Look, I'm not doing any more interviews right now. Ms. Chen, my name is Sarah Whitmore. The woman in your photograph is my great-great-aunt. She disappeared in 1920. Maya's hand tightened on the phone. "What? Helena Whitmore vanished on her wedding day over a century ago. I've been researching her case for 15 years. What you captured isn't just any ghost. It's someone my family has been searching for since before my grandmother was born." Maya sank onto her couch, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. You're saying that woman in my photo has been dead for over 100 years. I'm saying she's been missing for over 100 years. There's a difference." Sarah's voice carried a weight of certainty that made Maya's skin crawl. "Ms. Chen, have you experienced anything unusual since you posted that photo? Dreams, visions, unexplained phenomena?" Maya's blood ran cold. "How did you... what makes you think..." "Because it happens to everyone who gets close to Helena's story. The mountain doesn't like people digging into its secrets." "This is insane," Maya whispered. But even as she said it, she knew Sarah was telling the truth. The dreams, the sense of being watched, the way shadows seemed to move in her peripheral vision. It had all started the moment she posted that photo. "I'm in San Francisco with Dr. James Crawford, a paranormal researcher from UC Berkeley. We need to meet with you. There are things about Mount Shasta you need to understand before this goes any further." Maya looked around her apartment, at the life she'd built through carefully curated posts and strategic hashtags. Everything felt suddenly fragile, as if it might disappear as mysteriously as Helena Whitmore had over a century ago. "Where?" she asked. An hour later, Maya sat in a corner booth at a quiet cafe in the Mission District, studying the two people across from her. Sarah Whitmore looked exactly like someone who spent her days buried in historical archives. Practical clothes, no makeup, with an intensity that suggested she didn't have time for small talk. Dr. Crawford appeared more academic, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he'd seen things that couldn't be explained by conventional science. "Show her the other photographs," Sarah said without preamble. Crawford pulled out a tablet and swiped through a series of images. Each showed the same figure, sometimes barely visible, sometimes clearer, always wearing the same elaborate wedding dress. The photos spanned decades, taken by different people in different seasons, but the woman never aged, never changed. "This is from 1958, Crawford explained, showing Maya the camping photo. "This one's from 1982, taken by a geology student documenting rock formations. And this," he swiped to a digital photo, "was taken by a hiker in 2019, just 18 months ago." Maya stared at the images, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "So I'm not the first person to see her." "You're not even the 20th, Sarah replied, "but you're the first to capture her this clearly, and definitely the first to make it go viral. Helena has been trying to communicate for over a century, but something's changed. Your photo has more detail, more clarity than anything we've seen before." "What does she want?" Maya asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Crawford and Sarah exchanged a look. "We think she's trying to show people where she went," Crawford said carefully. "Mount Shasta has properties that conventional science can't explain. The indigenous Wintu people have always said there are places on the mountain where the boundary between worlds grows thin." "Worlds?" Maya's voice cracked slightly. "Think of it as different layers of reality," Sarah explained. "Most of the time, these layers are separate, but sometimes they overlap. We believe Helena didn't just disappear. She slipped through one of these overlaps and has been trapped there ever since." Maya's phone buzzed with a notification, another 100 comments on her photo, another 1,000 likes. The number of people sharing her image kept climbing, but now Maya realized she might have unleashed something far more dangerous than she'd intended. "The dreams I've been having," she said slowly. "Helena keeps trying to lead me somewhere in the forest. She looks terrified but also desperate, like she's running out of time." Sarah leaned forward. "What does the place look like? Can you describe it?" "Deeper in the woods, past where I took the photo, there's something that looks like stone formations, maybe ruins. And the trees—" Maya shuddered. "The trees look wrong somehow. Too tall, too dark, like they're not quite part of our world." Crawford's face had gone pale. "Maya, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not go back to Mount Shasta alone. What you're describing sounds like the threshold areas we've been trying to locate for years." "The places where people disappear?" Maya asked. "The places where people disappear," Sarah confirmed, "but also potentially the place where we might finally be able to bring Helena home." Outside the cafe, storm clouds were gathering despite the weather forecast calling for clear skies. As Maya looked up at the darkening afternoon, she could have sworn she saw a figure in white standing on the roof of the building across the street, watching them through the window. The Dunsmuir Historical Society's archives smelled of old paper and forgotten secrets. Sarah led Maya and Dr. Crawford through rows of filing cabinets and storage boxes, finally stopping at a section marked Whitmore Family, 1890–1925. The late afternoon sun filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. "I've been through these documents 1,000 times, Sarah said, pulling out a thick folder. "But maybe fresh eyes will see something I missed." She spread the contents across a metal table, newspaper clippings, police reports, witness statements, and photographs that chronicled the most mysterious disappearance in Siskiyou County history. The headline of the June 16, 1920 Dunsmuir Daily News screamed, "Railroad Heiress vanishes on wedding day, massive search underway." Maya picked up a formal portrait of Helena Whitmore, studying the face she'd seen in her dreams. Even in the sepia-toned photograph, Helena's beauty was striking, but there was something haunting in her expression, a sadness that seemed at odds with a woman about to marry into one of California's wealthiest families. "Tell me about the day she disappeared," Maya said. Sarah pulled out the original police report, handwritten in fading ink. June 15, 1920. Helena was supposed to marry Thomas Ashworth at 3 o'clock that afternoon. The ceremony was planned for the gardens of the Whitmore estate. About 200 guests, the social event of the year. Crawford examined a detailed map of the area from 1920. Where exactly was the estate? About 5 miles south of Mount Shasta, in what's now part of the National Forest. The original mansion burned down in 1943, but you can still find the foundation stones if you know where to look. Sarah continued reading from the police report. Helena was last seen at 11 in the morning by her maid, Catherine Murphy. Helena said she wanted to take a walk alone before the ceremony, to clear her head and pray for guidance. She was wearing her wedding dress. Apparently she'd insisted on putting it on early because she wanted to feel like a bride for as long as possible. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She was already in her wedding dress when she disappeared. According to every witness statement, yes, Catherine Murphy said Helena seemed nervous but excited. She asked for an hour alone and promised to be back in time for the final preparations. Crawford studied a witness statement, but she never came back. The alarm wasn't raised until 1:30, when they realized Helena should have been getting ready for photographs. Thomas Ashworth organized search parties immediately. They found her footprints leading from the estate gardens toward Mount Shasta, but the trail went cold about 2 miles up the mountain. Maya picked up another newspaper clipping, this one from a week later. Search for missing bride expands. Bloodhounds lose scent at mysterious grove. The accompanying photograph showed dozens of searchers combing through dense forest. The bloodhounds tracked her scent to an area called the Ancient Grove, Sarah explained. It's the same area where you took your selfie, Maya. The dogs would circle that spot for hours but couldn't pick up her trail beyond a specific point, like she'd just vanished into thin air. Crawford found a statement from the lead searcher, Sheriff William Morrison. Listen to this. The dogs became agitated and refused to proceed past the large Douglas fir at the north end of the grove. They would whine and back away, as if sensing something unnatural. 3 separate bloodhounds exhibited the same behavior. What about Thomas Ashworth? Maya asked. How did he react? Sarah's expression darkened. That's where the story gets interesting. Thomas was devastated, but he also became obsessed. He funded search efforts for months, hired private investigators, even brought in spiritualists and mediums. According to family letters I found, he claimed Helena had been taken by the mountain itself. She pulled out a yellowed letter written in elegant script. This is from Thomas to Helena's father, dated August 1920. I have consulted with the Wintu elders, as desperate circumstances require desperate measures. They speak of places on the sacred mountain, where the boundary between worlds grows thin, where those who are lost may sometimes be glimpsed, but never touched. I fear our Helena has fallen through such a place, and we may never retrieve her by conventional means. Crawford whistled low. He was investigating the supernatural angle even in 1920. Thomas never married anyone else, Sarah continued. He died in 1962, still searching for Helena. His estate papers mention regular trips to Mount Shasta, always to the same area where she disappeared. And here's the strangest part. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Thomas talking to someone who wasn't there during these visits. Maya felt her hands trembling as she picked up the final document in the folder, a handwritten journal entry dated June 15, 1960, exactly 40 years after Helena's disappearance. This was found in Thomas's belongings after he died, Sarah explained. I can see her sometimes, standing among the ancient trees where we lost her trail. She looks exactly as she did on our wedding day. Beautiful and young and forever out of reach. She tries to speak, but no sound crosses the distance between us. I know she's trapped somewhere beyond the veil, and I'm growing old while she remains unchanged. God forgive me, but part of me wants to follow her into whatever realm has claimed her. The room fell silent except for the sound of wind rattling the windows. Outside, despite the clear weather forecast, storm clouds were building over the northern horizon. Maya, Crawford said carefully, the dreams you've been having. When Helena tries to lead you somewhere, does she seem to recognize you? Maya thought back to the recurring nightmare, remembering the desperate way Helena had gestured, the urgency in her movements. Yes, actually. Like she's been waiting for me specifically. Sarah and Crawford exchanged worried looks. What? Maya demanded. There's one more thing, Sarah said reluctantly. Something I've never told anyone because it sounds completely insane. She pulled out a small leather-bound diary. This belonged to Catherine Murphy, Helena's maid. She wrote in it every day for 60 years. Most of it's mundane household records, but there are entries. Sarah flipped to a page marked with a torn piece of paper. Catherine claimed that on the anniversary of Helena's disappearance, every year until she died in 1980, she would dream of Helena standing in the ancient grove. and Helena would always be pointing at something just out of view, saying the same thing over and over. "What did she say?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew. Sarah read from the diary in a voice barely above a whisper. "She's coming. The one who can see me clearly. Tell her to follow the stone path when the mountain calls. Tell her not to be afraid of the crossing. Tell her I've been waiting so long for someone who can help me come home." Maya's blood turned to ice. Every word matched the feelings she'd experienced in her dreams, the sense that Helena had been waiting specifically for her, that Maya was somehow the key to solving a century-old mystery. But as thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of an impossible storm began to patter against the windows, Maya realized that helping Helena might mean risking her own disappearance into whatever otherworldly realm had claimed the bride over 100 years ago. The storm that had been brewing all afternoon finally broke as Maya, Sarah, and Dr. Crawford left the Historical Society. Rain lashed against the windows of Crawford's rented Subaru as they drove through the darkening streets of Dunsmuir, windshield wipers struggling against the sudden deluge. "This weather doesn't make sense," Crawford muttered, checking his phone's weather app. It was supposed to be clear until Thursday. Maya stared out the passenger window at Mount Shasta's peak, barely visible through the storm clouds. Even through the rain and growing darkness, the mountain seemed to loom larger than it should, as if it were drawing closer to the town below. It started right after we found Catherine's diary. "The mountain doesn't like people getting too close to the truth," Sarah said from the back seat, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "Every major breakthrough in Helena's case has been followed by unusual weather patterns." They were heading to Crawford's hotel room to plan their next move, but as they passed the turnoff for the Mount Shasta Trail access road, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. It was like a magnetic pull, a physical sensation that made her lean forward in her seat. "Stop," she said suddenly. Crawford glanced at her. "What?" "Stop the car. We need to go to the mountain. Now." "Maya, it's getting dark and there's a storm. She's calling me." Maya's voice carried a certainty that surprised even her. "Helena, I can feel her pulling me toward the trail. It's like someone's tugging on my heart." Sarah leaned forward between the seats. "Maya, that's exactly what Thomas Ashworth described in his later letters. The compulsion to return to the mountain, especially during storms." Crawford pulled over at a gas station, the engine idling as rain pounded the roof. "We can't go up there tonight. It's dangerous enough during the day, and in this weather, people who ignore the mountain's call end up following it anyway." Maya interrupted, the words coming from some deep part of her consciousness. "But when they go alone, they don't come back." The statement hung in the air like a threat. Crawford and Sarah exchanged worried looks in the rearview mirror. "How do you know that?" Sarah asked carefully. Maya turned to face them, and both passengers noted that her eyes looked different, darker, more distant. "I don't know. I just know. The same way I know that if we don't go tonight during this storm, we'll miss our chance. Helena's been waiting over a century for the right conditions to come together." Crawford's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and went pale. "It's from my research partner at Berkeley. She's been monitoring seismic activity around Mount Shasta." He read aloud, "James, unprecedented electromagnetic anomalies detected around Panther Meadows area. Readings similar to accounts of dimensional instabilities in theoretical physics. Recommend extreme caution if you're in the area." "The veil is thin tonight," Maya said, her voice taking on an almost trance-like quality. "Helena can reach through more easily, but so can other things. We need to get to her before—" "Before what?" Sarah demanded. Maya blinked, seeming to come back to herself slightly. "I don't know, but there's something else up there, something that doesn't want Helena to be found, something that's been keeping her trapped all these years." Lightning crashed overhead, illuminating the gas station in stark white light. In that brief moment, all three of them saw the same thing reflected in the car's windows, a figure in white standing just beyond the gas pumps, gesturing urgently toward the mountain road. When the lightning faded, the figure was gone. "We need emergency supplies," Crawford said grimly, accepting the inevitable. "Flashlights, rain gear, first aid kit, and we stay together, no matter what happens." 20 minutes later, they were hiking up the familiar trail in full rain gear, their headlamps cutting weak beams through the storm. The path that had been peaceful and welcoming during Maya's previous visit now felt ominous and treacherous. Every tree seemed to lean inward, creating tunnel-like passages that swallowed their light. "The electromagnetic interference is getting stronger," Crawford reported, checking a small device clipped to his backpack. "My GPS lost signal about a quarter-mile back." Maya moved with surprising confidence despite the darkness and rain, as if she were following an invisible guide. "We're close to where I took the photo. Maybe another half-mile." "Maya," Sarah called from behind them, "you need to know something about the people who've disappeared on this mountain. They don't just vanish. They seem to be drawn to specific locations during storms exactly like this one." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever pulled Helena through over a century ago might be trying to do the same thing to you." As if summoned by Sarah's words, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She stopped walking and pulled it out, water droplets immediately beading on the screen. The message was a single line: "Don't trust the path you're on. Take the old trail when you reach the lightning tree. H." "Helena's trying to warn us," Maya said, showing them the message. Crawford studied his map with a waterproof flashlight. "There is an old trail that branches off about 100 yards ahead. It was abandoned in the 1940s after a series of accidents, but it leads directly to the ancient grove." "What kind of accidents?" Sarah asked. "The kind where people walk into the forest and are never seen again." They reached the junction sooner than expected. The main trail continued upward toward the popular camping areas, but to their left, barely visible through the undergrowth, was a narrow path marked by a lightning-struck pine tree that stood like a twisted sentinel. Maya approached the old trail and felt the pull in her chest intensify dramatically. It was like being drawn by an invisible rope, so strong she had to brace herself against the dead tree to keep from walking forward. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where she wants us to go." But as they stood at the threshold of the abandoned path, all three of them heard something that made their blood run cold, the sound of footsteps approaching through the rain, moving far too fast for any human hiker, and the footsteps were coming from directly behind them, though they all knew no one else had been on the trail. The footsteps behind them were wrong in every conceivable way. They moved too fast, covering impossible distances with each step, and they seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. Crawford spun around, his headlamp beams slicing through the rain, but the trail behind them was empty. "We need to move," Maya said urgently, the pull toward the old trail becoming almost painful. "Whatever's following us doesn't want us to reach Helena." They plunged into the abandoned path, branches whipping at their faces as they pushed through decades of overgrowth. The trail was barely visible, marked only by occasional stone cairns that seemed to glow faintly in their flashlight beams. The sensation of being pursued intensified, though when they stopped to listen, they heard only the storm. "The cairns," Sarah panted as they paused to catch their breath. "They're not natural formations. Someone's been maintaining this trail." Crawford examined one of the stone markers more closely. "These are fresh. Some of these rocks couldn't have been here more than a few months." "Thomas," Maya said with sudden certainty. "Thomas Ashworth was still coming up here in the 1960s. He must have marked the path to the place where he could see Helena." They continued climbing, the old trail winding deeper into the forest than the main path ever did. Ancient trees pressed close on both sides, their trunks so massive that 3 people couldn't have wrapped their arms around them. Maya noticed that many of the trees bore strange markings, not carved by human hands, but burn patterns that spiraled around the bark like frozen lightning. "Crawford," Sarah whispered, "your electromagnetic detector is going crazy." The device was emitting a steady stream of clicks, the sound accelerating as they moved deeper into the forest. Crawford studied the readings with growing alarm. "We're approaching some kind of massive energy source. The readings are off the charts." "Look," Maya said, pointing ahead through the rain. The trees opened into a circular clearing about 50 yards across. In the center stood the ancient grove, a ring of impossibly tall Douglas firs that seemed to stretch up beyond the reach of their lights. But it was what lay within the ring that took their breath away. Stone formations rose from the forest floor, weathered and moss-covered but clearly artificial. They formed a rough spiral pattern leading to a depression in the center of the grove, like an amphitheater carved from living rock. The stones hummed with an energy they could feel in their bones, and the air above the formation shimmered despite the rain. "This isn't on any geological survey," Crawford breathed. "These formations are ancient, but they're not natural." Maya stepped toward the stone circle, and immediately the world around her changed. The rain stopped falling on her skin, though she could see it continuing everywhere else. The sounds of the storm faded to a distant whisper, replaced by something that might have been music, or voices singing in a language she didn't recognize. "Maya, stop!" Sarah grabbed her arm. "You're starting to fade." Maya looked down at her hand and gasped. She could see through her own skin to the forest floor below. "I can feel Helena," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "She's just on the other side. She's been trapped in this circle for over a century." "Trapped by what?" Crawford demanded, but his question was answered by a sound that made them all freeze in terror. From the forest behind them came a roar that belonged to no earthly creature, a sound like mountains grinding together, like the scream of wind through cosmic emptiness. Trees began to crack and fall as something massive moved through the woods toward their location. "The Guardian?" Maya whispered, the knowledge arriving in her mind like a forgotten memory suddenly recalled. "The mountain has a guardian that keeps people from crossing over. It's what took Helena, and it's what's been preventing her from coming home." The roaring grew closer, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood and falling stones. Whatever was approaching was tearing through the ancient forest as if it were made of paper. Crawford's electromagnetic detector exploded in a shower of sparks. The energy readings just spiked beyond anything the device could measure. "We need to get Maya out of that circle before—" "No," Maya said firmly, taking another step toward the stone spiral. She was becoming more translucent with each movement, but her voice carried absolute conviction. "This is what Helena's been waiting for. Someone who could see her clearly enough to cross over and help her escape." Through the shimmering air above the stones, they could all see her now. Helena Whitmore standing in the center of the spiral, with her hands pressed against what looked like an invisible barrier. Her wedding dress was pristine, despite the century that had passed, and her face was filled with desperate hope as she watched Maya approach. But they could also see something else moving in the space where Helena was trapped. Shadow shapes that circled her like predators, growing more agitated as Maya drew closer to the barrier between worlds. "Maya, there are things in there with her," Sarah shouted over the approaching roar of the Guardian. "Dark things that don't want anyone crossing over." "I know," Maya called back, now so translucent they could barely see her. "But Helena's been protecting herself from them for 100 years. She's stronger than they are. She just needs someone to help her break through." The ground began to shake as the Guardian approached their location. Trees on the far side of the clearing began to topple, revealing glimpses of something enormous moving between them, something that defied description, as if it existed in too many dimensions for human eyes to properly process. Maya reached the edge of the stone depression and looked down at Helena, who was now gesturing frantically towards something behind her in the otherworldly space. Maya could see what Helena was pointing at, a rent in the fabric of reality itself, a tear that had been slowly widening over the past century. "She's not just trapped," Maya realized with growing horror. "She's been guarding the tear, keeping something much worse from coming through into our world." And whatever Helena had been holding back for over a century was finally starting to break free. The mountain guardian exploded into the clearing with a sound like reality itself tearing apart. Crawford and Sarah threw themselves behind the nearest standing stones as the creature's presence warped the very air around them. It was impossible to look at directly. Their eyes kept sliding away as if their brains refused to process what they were seeing. What Maya could make out through her increasingly translucent vision was something ancient and vast, composed of living shadow and stone, with appendages that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It moved like flowing lava, mixed with hurricane wind, and where it touched the ground, the earth itself recoiled. "You cannot pass." The Guardian's voice boomed from everywhere at once, speaking directly into their minds rather than their ears. "The seal must not be broken. The bride guards what must never be released." Maya, now standing at the very edge of the stone depression, could see Helena more clearly than ever. The bride's face was streaked with tears of relief and terror as she watched Maya approach the barrier. But behind Helena, the shadow shapes were growing more aggressive, pressing against the weakening tear in reality with increasing desperation. "Helena's been alone down there for over a century," Maya called to Crawford and Sarah, her voice echoing strangely across dimensions. "She's exhausted. Whatever she's been holding back is about to break through whether we help her or not." The Guardian's roar shook the ancient trees, several of which simply crumbled to dust under the assault of otherworldly sound. "The crossing will doom both worlds. Stand back, mortal. Do not force me to add your essence to the mountain's eternal watch." Crawford emerged from behind his stone shelter, his academic curiosity overriding his terror. "You're not trying to stop Helena from escaping," he shouted at the Guardian. "You're trying to stop whatever's behind her from getting out." "The wind, too, called them the hungry dark," the Guardian replied, its massive form shifting like smoke and granite. "They are the spaces between stars, the void that devours light. The bride stumbled through during a moment of weakness, when love and loss tore the veil thin. She has held them back, but her strength fails. Maya looked down at Helena and saw the truth in the bride's exhausted face. Helena had been fighting a battle for over a century, standing guard at a cosmic wound that threatened both worlds. But the effort was killing her spirit, making her fade even in her own trapped dimension. "There has to be another way," Maya said, taking another step toward the barrier. She was almost completely transparent now, existing more in Helena's realm than in her own. Some way to seal the tear without leaving her trapped forever. "The seal requires a guardian," the mountain entity replied grimly. "One from each side of the veil. The bride cannot abandon her post, and no one from your world has been willing to take her place." Sarah stepped out from her hiding spot, rain streaming down her face. What if someone did? What if someone was willing to stay and help Helena guard the tear? The guardian's attention shifted to her, and Sarah felt the weight of cosmic intelligence examining her soul. "You carry the bride's blood. The connection would be strong, but the sacrifice would be eternal. No rest, no peace, only endless vigilance against the dark." "Sarah, no," Crawford protested. "There has to be another solution." But Maya had already seen it. In the moment when her vision existed fully in both worlds, she could perceive the true nature of the problem. The tear wasn't getting larger because Helena was weakening. It was getting larger because she was alone. The barrier required two guardians, one from each side, working in perfect harmony. "I'll stay," Maya said simply. "Helena showed me the way here because she knew I'd be willing to help her properly guard the seal." "Maya, you don't understand what you're offering," Sarah cried. "You'd be giving up your entire life, your world, everything you've ever known." Maya smiled sadly as she looked back at her new friends. "What kind of life would I have knowing I'd condemned both worlds because I was too selfish to help?" Helena sacrificed her wedding day, her future with Thomas, everything she'd ever dreamed of. "The least I can do is help her carry the burden." She took the final step into the stone depression, and the barrier between worlds dissolved like morning mist. Immediately, Maya felt Helena's presence as a warmth in her chest, a deep gratitude mixed with overwhelming relief that she was no longer alone. But the moment the barrier dropped, the shadow shapes behind Helena surged forward with predatory hunger. The hungry dark pressed against the weakening seal with the force of collapsing stars, and Maya realized that their combined strength might not be enough to hold it. "The ritual," Helena spoke for the first time in over a century, her voice like silver bells in Maya's mind. "We need the mountain's help to strengthen the seal, but the guardian must be willing to bind part of itself to the barrier." The mountain guardian's form seemed to consider this, its ancient consciousness weighing the cost. "I have protected this place since the first ice covered the peaks. To bind myself to the seal would diminish my ability to guard the rest of the mountain." "Fight, but it would save both worlds," Crawford called from the surface. "Isn't that worth the risk?" The hungry dark pressed harder against the failing seal, and for a moment, tendrils of absolute darkness leaked through into the grove. Where they touched, the stone itself began to age and crumble, and the ancient trees started to wither as if their life force was being drained away. "Choose quickly," Helena urged. "The seal won't hold much longer, even with Maya's help." The guardian looked at Maya and Helena, standing together at the cosmic wound, then at Crawford and Sarah, who represented all the innocent lives that would be lost if the hungry dark broke through. "Very well," it rumbled. "I will bind a portion of my essence to your seal, but know that this weakens the mountain's other defenses. You must be vigilant always, for there are other threats that may now find their way through." The guardian raised one massive appendage, and Maya felt power flow through her like liquid starlight. Helena gasped as the same energy filled her, and together they pressed their combined will against the tear in reality. The hungry dark recoiled with a sound like universes screaming, pushed back into the void between worlds as the cosmic wound began to close. But Maya could feel the cost. She and Helena were now bound to this place, their life forces tied to maintaining the seal for as long as they drew breath. As the barrier reformed around them, stronger than before but requiring constant vigilance, Maya realized that her old life was truly over. But looking at Helena's face, no longer marked by desperate isolation, she felt a peace she'd never known in her endless pursuit of social media validation. They were guardians now, protectors of the boundary between worlds, and they would never be alone again. The moment the seal solidified around Maya and Helena, the world exploded into sensory overload. Maya could suddenly perceive reality from both sides of the dimensional barrier simultaneously, seeing Crawford and Sarah standing in the rain-soaked grove while also experiencing the ethereal realm where she and Helena now existed together. In their dimension, the ancient grove appeared as it had been intended, a sacred circle where the boundaries between worlds were naturally thin, designed by some ancient civilization to monitor and protect against interdimensional threats. The stone formations weren't weathered ruins, but gleaming pillars of crystalline energy that pulsed with cosmic purpose. The Wintu built this place, Helena explained, her voice now clear and strong in Maya's mind. Not the stones themselves, but the ritual that activated them. They knew the mountain was a nexus point, a place where multiple realities intersected. Maya watched in fascination as her new perception revealed the truth about Mount Shasta. The entire mountain was honeycombed with dimensional passages, most of them safely sealed, but some still active. She could see the flows of energy that connected their world to dozens of others, and the delicate balance that kept the barriers stable. Thomas found some of their records, Helena continued. That's why he kept coming back here. He learned enough of their language to understand that I hadn't simply died. I'd been caught in a dimensional shift and pulled through to guard against something terrible. In the physical world, Crawford and Sarah approached the edge of the stone depression cautiously. From their perspective, Maya and Helena appeared as ghostly figures surrounded by shimmering air, visible but clearly existing in a different layer of reality. "Can you hear us?" Sarah called. Maya nodded, discovering she could still speak across the barrier, though her voice sounded distant and echoing. "We're okay. Actually, we're better than okay. Helena's been alone with this responsibility for so long, but together we can maintain the seal without the constant struggle." Crawford was documenting everything with his camera, though Maya suspected the images wouldn't show what he was hoping to capture. "What about the thing you were holding back? The hungry dark?" Helena's expression grew serious. "They're contained for now, but they're not gone. Think of them as cosmic predators that feed on the life force of entire dimensions. Our universe is particularly rich in the kind of energy they crave." "How many of them are there?" Sarah asked. Maya concentrated on the sealed tear, her new senses allowing her to probe its edges carefully. What she discovered made her stomach turn. It's not a question of how many. The hungry dark isn't individual entities. It's more like a living void, an anti-universe that wants to consume everything that exists and turn it into more nothing. The Mountain Guardian, which had been silent since binding part of its essence to the seal, rumbled back to life. The Guardians speak truth. The hungry dark is patient, but it never stops trying to find weaknesses in the barriers. Other nexus points exist throughout your world, places where the veil is thin and the risk of breakthrough is high. Crawford pulled out a notebook, his academic instincts taking over despite the surreal circumstances. "Where are these other nexus points? Are they protected?" "Some are," the Guardian replied. "Ancient bloodlines maintain the watches in certain places. The stone circles of Britain, the sacred caves of Tibet, the cenotes of the Yucatan. But others have been forgotten as your species lost its connection to the old knowledge. That's why Helena appeared so clearly in my photo," Maya realized. Mount Shasta's nexus was weakening because she was exhausted from guarding it alone. The mountain was calling for help, and I happened to be someone who could see across dimensions. Helena nodded. "You have the sight, Maya. It's rare in your generation, but not unknown. Most people who possess it learn to ignore it, convinced they're imagining things." "But why me specifically?" Maya asked. "There must be others with the same ability." "Because you were willing to look," Helena replied simply. "When you saw me in your photograph, you didn't dismiss it or rationalize it away. You investigated, and more importantly, you cared about solving the mystery rather than just exploiting it for attention." Maya felt a pang of guilt, remembering her initial excitement about the photo's viral potential. "I did think about the publicity at first, but you chose to help when you understood the truth," Helena said gently. "That's what matters." Sarah was studying the stone circle, noting how the energy patterns had changed since Maya and Helena had joined forces. "The seal looks stronger, but you're both trapped here forever. There has to be another way." "There might be," the Mountain Guardian said slowly, "but it would require activating the other nexus points, creating a network of guardians instead of isolated sentinels. The burden could be shared across multiple dimensions and multiple guardians." Crawford looked up from his notes. "You're talking about a global network of interdimensional protectors." "It has existed before," the Guardian confirmed. "During what your historians call the last ice age, when the barriers between worlds were naturally stronger. But as your civilization grew and forgot the old ways, the network crumbled. Most nexus points now rely on a single guardian, if they're protected at all. Maya felt a surge of hope. Could we rebuild it? Find others with the sight and train them to help? The knowledge exists, Helena said. Thomas spent decades translating Wintu records before he died. His research is stored in the Ashworth family vault in Sacramento. Everything needed to identify and activate nexus points throughout the world. But first, the Guardian warned, you must ensure this seal remains stable. The hungry dark will test your defenses constantly, probing for weaknesses. And there are other threats that may be drawn to the mountain, now that my attention is partially focused elsewhere. As if summoned by the Guardian's words, Maya's enhanced perception detected movement in the forest beyond the grove. Something was approaching through the storm, multiple somethings, moving with predatory coordination through the darkness. We have company, Maya announced, her voice carrying new authority. Something's drawn to the energy we just released. Crawford and Sarah spun around, peering into the rain-lashed forest, but saw nothing. However, Maya and Helena could see them clearly, shadow shapes that weren't quite the hungry dark, but weren't entirely from Earth either, scavengers that fed on dimensional disturbances, attracted by the massive energy spike of the seal's reformation. Shadow feeders, the Guardian identified grimly. They slip through when barriers are weakened, individually weak, but dangerous in groups. Maya felt power flow through her as the seal's energy responded to the threat. She and Helena were no longer just prisoners. They were the mountain's active guardians, with access to forces beyond anything she'd ever imagined. How do we fight them? Maya asked. Helena smiled, and for the first time in over a century, it was an expression of confident strength rather than desperate determination. Together, she said, the way we should have been doing this all along. The shadow feeders emerged from the forest like living smoke, their forms shifting between solid and vapor as they circled the ancient grove. There were at least a dozen of them, each roughly humanoid but wrong in fundamental ways. Too many joints, limbs that bent in impossible directions, and faces that seemed to be carved from crystallized darkness. Crawford and Sarah pressed back against the stone pillars, unable to see the creatures but feeling their presence as a bone-deep chill that made their teeth ache. The temperature in the grove plummeted despite the warm rain, and their breath began to mist in the suddenly frigid air. They're feeding on the residual energy from the seal's reformation, Helena explained to Maya, her voice tense with concentration. If they consume enough, they'll be able to manifest fully in your dimension. Maya watched the creatures probe the edges of the grove, testing the ancient protections built into the stone circle. What happens if they break through? They'll drain the life force from your friends first, then spread outward from the mountain, the Guardian rumbled. Shadow feeders reproduce by consuming living energy. 2 could become hundreds within days. One of the creatures pressed against the protective barrier surrounding the grove, and sparks of dark energy crackled where it touched the ancient wards. The barrier held, but Maya could see hairline cracks beginning to form in the spiritual architecture. The protections are old, Helena said grimly. They weren't designed to handle this kind of coordinated assault. Maya felt the seal's power flowing through her, and with it came knowledge she'd never possessed, understanding of forces that existed beyond the physical world, insight into the fundamental structures that held reality together. We can reinforce the barriers, but we'll need to channel energy directly from the nexus. That's dangerous, the Guardian warned. Drawing too much power could destabilize the seal and give the hungry dark an opportunity to break through. And if we don't stop the shadow feeders, they'll kill Crawford and Sarah and then spread across California, Maya replied. We have to risk it. Helena nodded, her form becoming more luminous as she prepared to channel power. I've been connected to this nexus for over a century. I can moderate the flow, keep it from overwhelming the seal. Together, they reached deep into the mountain's core, drawing on the vast energies that made Mount Shasta a dimensional nexus point. Maya gasped as cosmic force flowed through her spirit, raw power that threatened to burn away her consciousness if she lost control. But Helena's steady presence guided her, showing her how to shape the energy without being consumed by it. Light erupted from the stone circle, not visible to Crawford and Sarah, but blazing like a newborn star in the dimensional realm where the shadow feeders prowled. The creatures recoiled with sounds like glass breaking, their forms becoming less solid as the protective barriers strengthened and expanded. But instead of retreating, the shadow feeders began to merge, their individual forms flowing together into something larger and more threatening. The combined entity stood nearly 10 feet tall, with multiple sets of arms and a face that seemed to contain swirling galaxies instead of features. "They're forming a collective," the Guardian observed with alarm. "I have not seen such behavior in millennia." The merged shadow feeder raised its multiple arms and began to weave patterns in the air, drawing symbols that hurt to look at directly. Where its gestures passed, reality itself seemed to fray, creating small tears that bled darkness into the grove. "It's trying to create its own dimensional breach," Maya realized, bypassing our defenses by tearing holes in space itself. Crawford, who couldn't see the creature but could feel the wrongness growing in the air around him, shouted over the rising wind, "The electromagnetic readings are spiking again. Something's destabilizing the local space-time." One of the tiers opened directly above Sarah, and tendrils of absolute void began to descend toward her head. She looked up just as the darkness touched her hair, and immediately began to age, her brown hair turning gray, then white, as the shadow feeder's touch drained years from her life. "Sarah!" Crawford lunged forward, pulling her away from the descending darkness, but more tears were opening throughout the grove. Maya felt rage surge through her, clean, burning anger that ignited the Nexus power like gasoline. "No," she said, her voice echoing across dimensions. "You will not touch them." She and Helena joined hands across the dimensional barrier, their combined will focusing the mountain's energy into a weapon of pure creation. Light blazed from every stone in the circle, so bright that even Crawford and Sarah could see it clearly. The light touched the shadow feeder's tears, and instead of the usual conflict between opposing forces, something unexpected happened. The darkness didn't fight the light. It transformed, becoming something entirely new. The tears began to heal, but as they closed, they left behind structures that looked almost like windows, transparent barriers that allowed Maya and Helena to extend their influence into the physical world. "Conversion, rather than destruction," Helena breathed in amazement. "Maya, you're not just fighting them. You're transforming their attack into something that strengthens our defenses." The merged shadow feeder let out a sound like reality screaming, its form beginning to break apart, as its own stolen energy was converted into protective barriers around the grove. But as it dissolved, Maya caught a glimpse of something that chilled her to her core. The creature wasn't acting alone. In the moment before it dispersed, she saw connections, threads of dark energy leading away from Mount Shasta toward other locations around the world. The shadow feeders weren't just random scavengers attracted to their energy release. They were scouts, gathering information for something much larger. "Helena," Maya said urgently, "I think we've been discovered. Whatever's coordinating the shadow feeders knows about the Nexus network now." The Guardian's form shifted, its attention turning toward the distant connections Maya had perceived. "The ancient enemy stirs. I had hoped we would have more time to prepare, but your success here has drawn attention from those who thought the old Guardians were extinct." "Ancient enemy!" Crawford called from below, still supporting Sarah as she recovered from her brief contact with the void. "The force that originally created the hungry dark," the Guardian explained grimly. "Not a creature or entity, but a principle, the will to entropy, the desire to return all of existence to primordial chaos. It has been dormant for eons, but the reformation of the seal may have awakened its interest." Maya looked at Helena, seeing her own determination reflected in the bride's face. They had accepted the responsibility of guarding one nexus point, but now it seemed they might be facing a threat that could endanger the entire network of dimensional barriers. "Then we'd better start rebuilding that Guardian network quickly," Maya said, "because I don't think we can face this alone." As if in response to her words, her phone, somehow still functional despite everything that had happened, buzzed with a new message. This one wasn't from Helena. The text simply read, "The sleepers wake, the old seals weaken. Find the others before we find you. A friend." And attached to the message was a list of coordinates, marking locations around the globe where ancient nexus points lay hidden and unguarded. The coordinates led to places that Crawford recognized immediately from his paranormal research. Stonehenge in England, Machu Picchu in Peru, the pyramids of Giza, Easter Island, and a dozen other locations long considered mystical by various cultures. But mixed among the famous sites were places he'd never heard of, remote valleys in Tibet, hidden caves in the Australian outback, an island in the Bering Sea that appeared on no modern maps. "Whoever sent this knows about the entire network," Crawford said, studying the list on Maya's phone. "This is comprehensive beyond anything I've ever seen in the literature." Sarah, still pale from her encounter with the shadow feeder's void touch, was cross-referencing the coordinates with Thomas Ashworth's translated Wintu records. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a passage in the century-old notes. Thomas wrote, "The singers spoke of 13 primary nodes and 37 secondary anchors, all connected by flows of earth song that maintain the Great Barrier. Should enough nodes fall silent, the song itself will fade, and what was held back will pour through." 13 primary nodes, Maya repeated from within the dimensional barrier. "And if this list is accurate, we're looking at exactly 50 sites total." Helena's ethereal form grew more solid as she concentrated, her connection to the nexus, allowing her to perceive the global energy flows more clearly. "I can feel them," she said with wonder. "Faint signals from other guardians, like distant lights in an enormous darkness. But so many of the connections are weak or completely severed." The mountain guardian's attention focused on the coordinates, its ancient consciousness probing the distant sites. 7 of the primary nodes remain active. 6 have gone completely dark. The secondary anchors... It paused, and when it spoke again, its voice carried deep concern. "Less than half maintain their protective functions." "How long do we have?" Crawford asked. "The degradation has been gradual over millennia," the Guardian replied. "But your success here has accelerated the process. The ancient enemy is testing the remaining barriers, probing for weaknesses. I estimate perhaps weeks before a critical failure occurs." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dimensional energies surrounding her. Weeks to rebuild a global network that took ancient civilizations centuries to construct? "Not rebuild," Helena said, her voice carrying new hope. "Restore. The infrastructure still exists. The ley lines, the nexus points, the anchor stones. What's missing are the guardians and the knowledge to activate dormant sites." Crawford was already pulling up airline booking sites on his phone. "If we can identify active guardians at the surviving sites, maybe we can coordinate a simultaneous reactivation of the network." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You and I can't travel to these places fast enough, but maybe we don't need to." She turned toward the dimensional barrier where Maya and Helena stood. "You're connected to the nexus now. Can you communicate with other guardians through the energy flows?" Maya reached out with her new senses, following the threads of power that connected Mount Shasta to the distant sites. It was like learning to see with entirely new organs, overwhelming at first, but gradually becoming comprehensible. "There," she said suddenly. "I can feel someone at Stonehenge. An old woman. She's been guarding the site alone for, God, it must be 60 years. And there's someone in Tibet, in a monastery that exists half in our dimension and half in another. And," she paused, her perception touching something unexpected, "there are others like us, guardians who've been pulled through to protect their sites, trapped between worlds but maintaining the barriers." "The missing persons," Crawford breathed, "all those unexplained disappearances at mystical sites over the centuries. They weren't taken. They were recruited." Helena nodded grimly. "The network has been maintaining itself through sacrifice, pulling in new guardians when the old ones fade. But it's not sustainable. Each generation has fewer people with the site, fewer willing to make the ultimate sacrifice." "Then we change the system," Maya declared. "Instead of trapping guardians, we teach them to work in shifts, to share the burden, so no one has to sacrifice their entire existence." The mountain guardian rumbled thoughtfully. "Such an arrangement would require perfect coordination among all sites. A single moment of inattention could allow a breakthrough." "What if we created a backup system?" Sarah suggested. "A way for guardians to monitor multiple sites simultaneously?" Maya's eyes lit up as understanding dawned. "The stones, the crystalline structures here in the grove, they're not just anchors, they're communication devices. We could network them, create a global monitoring system where guardians could cover for each other." "I can help design the network," Crawford offered. "My electromagnetic research, combined with Thomas's Wintu translations, might provide the technical framework." But even as they planned, Maya's enhanced perception detected new threats. The ancient enemy's influence was spreading, corrupting the weakest nexus points and turning them into beachheads for invasion. She could see darkness seeping into reality at sites where the Guardians had failed or abandoned their posts. "We're running out of time faster than we thought," she announced. "Something's happening in Egypt. The Giza nexus is under direct assault." Helena's form blazed with urgency. "That's one of the primary nodes. If it falls, the entire Mediterranean network could collapse." "Can we help from here?" Crawford asked. Maya was already reaching across the dimensional flows, trying to make contact with whoever was defending the Egyptian site. What she found made her gasp in horror. "There's no one there," she whispered. "The Guardian is gone, and the barriers are failing. Whatever's attacking Giza isn't just testing the defenses. It's trying to turn the Nexus into a gateway." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If the ancient enemy could corrupt a primary node, instead of simply destroying it, they could use the network itself as a weapon, turning the very system designed to protect reality into a means of invasion. "We have to warn the other Guardians," Helena said urgently. "If they don't understand the new threat, they might inadvertently help the enemy by maintaining connections to compromised sites." Maya's phone buzzed again with another message from their mysterious ally. "Giza has fallen. Cairo Nexus compromised. Initiating emergency protocols. All Guardians to high alert status. Do not attempt to reconnect corrupted nodes." "Council of Watchers." "Council of Watchers?" Sarah repeated. "Who are they?" But before anyone could speculate, the ancient grove erupted with alarm signals from across the global network. One by one, the distant lights Helena and Maya could perceive began winking out, not destroyed but deliberately severing their connections to prevent contamination from the corrupted Egyptian site. The Guardian network was going into emergency shutdown, leaving each remaining site isolated and vulnerable to individual assault. And based on the accelerating darkness Maya could see spreading across the dimensional landscape, the ancient enemy was preparing for a coordinated strike against every surviving nexus point simultaneously. "They're not trying to break through one site at a time anymore," Maya realized with growing dread. "They're going to hit all of them at once before we can organize any kind of defense." The final battle for the barriers between worlds was about to begin, and they were facing it with a fractured network and isolated Guardians who had no way to coordinate their resistance. The attack began at dawn, though the sun never truly rose over Mount Shasta that morning. Instead, the sky took on a sickly purple hue as reality itself began to warp under the ancient enemy's assault. Maya and Helena, standing guard within their dimensional barrier, watched in horror as tears began opening in the fabric of space throughout the grove. Unlike the crude rips created by the shadow feeders, these breaches were surgically precise, designed to exploit the exact weaknesses in the Nexus's defenses. Through each tear they could see glimpses of other worlds, not the void of the hungry dark, but places where the ancient enemy had already won. Realities transformed into crystalline monuments to entropy and despair. "They're not trying to destroy our world," Helena realized with dawning horror. "They're trying to convert it, turn our reality into another one of their conquered dimensions." The Mountain Guardian's form was flickering, its attention divided between defending Mount Shasta and monitoring the simultaneous attacks on other nexus points around the globe. "All primary nodes are under assault," it reported grimly. "Stonehenge is holding, but barely. The Tibetan monastery has gone silent. Machu Picchu," it paused. "Machu Picchu has fallen." Maya felt the loss like a physical blow, a sudden absence in the network that left her staggering. When a nexus is corrupted, does it affect the others? "Worse," the Guardian replied. "Each fallen node becomes a weapon against the remaining ones. The enemy can channel their attacks through the corrupted sites, multiplying their assault force." Crawford and Sarah, huddled behind the stone pillars as reality warped around them, were documenting everything with desperate scientific precision. If they survived this, someone needed to understand what had happened and how to prevent it from occurring again. "The electromagnetic readings are unlike anything in the literature," Crawford shouted over the rising dimensional storm. "It's as if someone's rewriting the fundamental constants of physics." Through her connection to the Nexus, Maya could perceive the true scope of the assault. The ancient enemy wasn't just a destructive force, it was a cosmic virus, a principle of corruption that turned each conquered reality into a factory for producing more corruption. Earth was just the latest target in a campaign that had been consuming dimensions for eons. "There has to be a way to fight back," Maya said, drawing more power from the Nexus despite the risk to the seal. "Some weakness we can exploit." Helena's ethereal form was blazing with defensive energy, but even their combined strength was barely holding the Mount Shasta barriers intact. "Maya, I've been thinking about what you did to the shadow feeders, how you converted their attack into protective energy instead of just fighting it. You want to try that on a cosmic scale?" Maya asked, understanding immediately. "Not try, we have to. It's the only strategy that has a chance of working." The Mountain Guardian's attention snapped back to them. "You would attempt to convert the ancient enemy's own assault into protective energy? The risk is enormous. If you fail, you could accelerate the corruption of this nexus. And if we don't try, we lose everything anyway, Maya replied. Helena, how do we do this? Together, Helena said simply. But not just us. We need every surviving Guardian to attempt the conversion simultaneously. A coordinated defense that turns the enemy's strength against itself. Maya reached out through the dimensional flows, making contact with the scattered Guardians who still maintained their posts. The elderly woman at Stonehenge, exhausted but determined. A young man in the Australian outback who had been pulled through only weeks ago. Twin sisters guarding a nexus in the Canadian Rockies, and others, all holding desperate defensive positions as reality crumbled around them. Can you hear me? Maya projected across the network. The responses came back immediately, voices speaking dozens of languages, but united in their determination to protect their worlds. They had all felt the coordinated assault, all understood that this was the final battle. Maya explained the conversion strategy, sharing her experience with the shadow feeders and Helena's insights about transforming destructive energy into protective force. It was a desperate plan that required perfect timing and absolute trust among Guardians who had never met. We need to drop our individual defenses simultaneously, Maya broadcast. Let the ancient enemy's assault pour through, but instead of fighting it, we channel it into the network itself, turn their own power into barriers. The risks were staggering. A single moment of hesitation, one Guardian failing to maintain the conversion, and the entire network could be instantly corrupted. But as the purple sky overhead began to crack like broken glass, revealing the crystalline horror of conquered realities beyond, Maya knew they were out of conventional options. On my mark, she projected to the global network of Guardians. 3, 2, 1, now. Across the world, dimensional barriers dropped simultaneously. The ancient enemy's assault poured through the nexus points like a cosmic tsunami, raw entropic force that should have instantly corrupted every site on the network. But instead of resisting the flow, Maya and the other Guardians embraced it, wrapping their consciousness around the destructive energy and transforming it through sheer force of will and desperate love for their worlds. The process was agony, like trying to hug molten lava while it burned away everything they were, but slowly, incredibly, it began to work. The entropic force flowing through Mount Shasta transformed into something else entirely, protective energy so pure and powerful that it blazed like a second sun in the dimensional realm. Similar transformations occurred at every active nexus point, creating a network of converted power that was orders of magnitude stronger than anything the Guardians had wielded before. It's working, Helena gasped, her form becoming more solid as the transformed energy flowed through her. Maya, we're not just defending anymore, we're purifying the corrupted sites. Through the network, Maya could feel the ancient enemy's assault faltering as their own power was turned against them. The corrupted nexus points began to cleanse themselves, ejecting the entropic force and restoring their protective functions. But the enemy had one final gambit. In the moment before their assault completely collapsed, they concentrated all their remaining power into a single focused strike aimed directly at Mount Shasta, the nexus that had initiated the conversion defense. Incoming! The Mountain Guardian roared, but there was no time to prepare additional defenses. The concentrated assault struck the ancient grove with the force of a collapsing star, and for a moment that lasted eternity, Maya felt herself being torn apart at the quantum level. But Helena was there beside her, and together they held fast to their connection to the nexus, using the mountain's power to anchor themselves against total dissolution. When the cosmic storm finally cleared, Mount Shasta stood transformed. The ancient grove now blazed with protective energy, visible even to ordinary human perception, and the stone circle had become a crystalline monument that pulsed with the heartbeat of living reality. Maya and Helena found themselves changed as well, no longer trapped between dimensions, but existing fully in both realms simultaneously. They were permanent Guardians now, but Guardians with the power to walk between worlds and maintain the global network. Is it over? Crawford asked, emerging from behind his shelter to stare in wonder at the transformed grove. Maya smiled, feeling the steady pulse of the restored Guardian network flowing around the globe. The immediate threat is over, but there will always be other challenges, other forces trying to break through the barriers. That's why we need the network, Helena added, not just to defend, but to teach, to make sure that future generations understand what they're protecting and why it matters. Sarah was already taking photographs of the transformed site, documenting the new reality for posterity. What happens now? Maya looked at her friends, then at Helena, and finally at the crystalline monuments that marked the renewed nexus. Now we rebuild properly. We train new guardians, establish permanent schools at the nexus sites, and make sure this knowledge never gets lost again. And Helena added, with the first truly joyful smile she'd worn in over a century, we make sure no guardian ever has to face the darkness alone. As the sun finally broke through the clearing sky, casting natural light on the ancient grove for the first time since the battle began, Maya felt a deep sense of completion. She had lost her old life as a social media influencer, but she had gained something far more meaningful, a purpose that would protect countless worlds, and the knowledge that she and Helena would face whatever came next together. The viral selfie that had started it all seemed like a lifetime ago, but Maya realized it had been the beginning of something far more important than internet fame. It had been the first step in becoming who she was always meant to be, a guardian of the boundaries between worlds, standing watch at the threshold of forever. 6 months after the Battle of the Nexus, Maya Chen stood at the edge of the transformed ancient grove, watching as the latest group of candidates completed their training. The Mount Shasta Guardian Academy had become reality faster than anyone had imagined possible, drawing young people with the sight from around the world who wanted to learn to protect the boundaries between dimensions. The grove itself had become a wonder that couldn't be hidden from the world. The crystalline monuments pulsed with visible energy, and the space between the stones shimmered with interdimensional aurora that could be seen even by those without supernatural perception. The viral nature of Maya's original selfie had made Mount Shasta a pilgrimage destination, but now people came seeking something far more profound than social media content. The new candidates are progressing well, Helena observed, her form now able to manifest solidly in the physical world whenever she chose. After over a century trapped between dimensions, she had embraced her role as the Academy's head instructor with infectious enthusiasm. Maya nodded, watching a young man from Scotland successfully open a controlled dimensional window under Helena's careful supervision. David's got natural talent. He might be ready for the Stonehenge apprenticeship within a few months. The Global Guardian Network had evolved into something unprecedented, not the isolated sentinels of the past, but a connected community of protectors who shared knowledge, resources, and responsibilities. Each primary nexus now hosted an academy where candidates could train safely, and experienced guardians rotated between sites to prevent the isolation that had nearly destroyed the network. Dr. Crawford approached from the main academy building, carrying a tablet full of reports from other sites. He had given up his Berkeley position to become the network's primary researcher and coordinator, documenting everything they learned and maintaining communication between the scattered academies. "Excellent news from Tibet," he announced. "The monastery guardians have successfully reactivated 3 secondary anchors in the Himalayas, and Sarah's excavation team has confirmed another pre-Columbian nexus site in Central America." Sarah Whitmore had become the network's lead archaeologist, using Thomas Ashworth's translated records and her family's deep knowledge of Helena's case to locate and restore long-lost nexus points. Her near-death experience with the shadow feeder had left her with enhanced sensitivity to dimensional energies, making her uniquely qualified to identify inactive sites. "Any word from the Australian team?" Maya asked. "They've made contact with Aboriginal elders who still maintain oral traditions about the Dreamtime Nexus," Crawford replied. "Apparently that site never fully went dormant. The traditional guardians have been maintaining it through ritual and song for over 40,000 years." Helena smiled at this news. "The old knowledge survived in ways we never imagined. Indigenous communities around the world are helping us understand techniques that were lost centuries ago. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. The battle against the ancient enemy had drawn global attention to supernatural phenomena, forcing governments and scientific institutions to acknowledge realities they had long dismissed. Some nations had tried to claim the nexus sites as strategic resources, leading to complex negotiations about international protections for dimensional boundaries. But the Guardians had powerful allies. The Council of Watchers, revealed to be a secret organization of scholars and protectors that had operated for millennia, had emerged from the shadows to provide legal and political support. Ancient bloodlines that had maintained hidden traditions for generations stepped forward to share their knowledge, Even some religious leaders had recognized the spiritual significance of protecting the barriers between worlds. "Maya," called a familiar voice from across the grove. Jake Martinez, her former photographer and best friend, approached with his camera equipment. He had become the network's official documentarian, creating training materials and maintaining public awareness of the Guardian mission. Ready for the monthly check-in with the other sites, Maya nodded, walking to the center of the grove, where a new crystalline formation had grown, a communication nexus that allowed real-time contact with Guardian academies around the world. She placed her hands on the central crystal, feeling the familiar tingle as her consciousness expanded across the global network. One by one, the other sites came online. The elderly Guardian at Stonehenge, now supported by a team of young apprentices who had revitalized the ancient site. The twins in the Canadian Rockies, who had developed new techniques for training Guardians to work in perfect synchronization. The Australian Aboriginal elders, whose traditional songs had become part of the curriculum at every academy. "Network status report," Maya began, her voice carrying across dimensions to every active nexus point. "All primary nodes stable and fully operational," came the coordinated response. "Secondary anchors at 97% activation. New candidate intake steady across all academies. Any dimensional anomalies or potential threats? Minor shadow feeder incursions at 3 sites, all successfully contained by student guardians under supervision. No signs of organized assault or ancient enemy activity." Maya felt a deep satisfaction at the routine nature of the report. 6 months ago, any shadow feeder incursion would have been a crisis requiring emergency response. Now, properly trained guardians handled such threats as part of their regular duties. "Personal updates?" she asked, shifting to the more informal part of their weekly communication. The reports that followed painted a picture of a global community united by purpose. Guardians were marrying each other across continents, with their children often displaying enhanced abilities from birth. Former candidates who had completed their training were establishing new schools in major cities, teaching basic dimensional awareness to anyone with even minimal sensitivity. Scientific researchers were publishing papers that integrated supernatural phenomena into accepted theoretical frameworks. As the communication session ended and the other sites signed off, Maya found herself alone in the grove with Helena. It was during these quiet moments that she most appreciated the journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Helena asked softly. "Giving up your old life for this responsibility?" Maya considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she had been Maya Chen, social media influencer, chasing viral content and follower counts. Her biggest concerns had been engagement metrics and brand partnerships. That life seemed impossibly distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. "No," she said finally. "That life was about creating an illusion of connection, performing happiness for an audience that didn't really know me. This is about real connection, protecting something that actually matters." Helena smiled, her form becoming more translucent as the evening light faded. Thomas would have been amazed to see what grew from his research. A century of loneliness and sacrifice leading to a global community of protectors. "He didn't sacrifice for nothing," Maya assured her. "None of the Guardians did. Every person who held the line, even alone, even in despair, was protecting the future we're building now." As night fell over Mount Shasta, the crystalline monuments began to glow more brightly, their light visible for miles in every direction. The mountain had become a beacon, not just a guardian post, but a symbol of hope that ordinary people could rise to protect extraordinary things. Maya's phone buzzed with a notification, and she couldn't help but smile when she saw it was from Instagram. Her account, which she hadn't posted to since the night she discovered Helena's image, had gained millions of followers who weren't interested in lifestyle content but wanted updates about the Guardian network and dimensional protection efforts. Her last post had been a simple photo of the transformed ancient grove with the caption, "Some responsibilities are bigger than personal ambition. Some mysteries are worth sacrificing everything to solve. Some friendships transcend the boundaries of worlds and time. Guardian life, Mount Shasta, protect the barriers." It had received over 50 million likes, but more importantly, it had attracted thousands of new candidates to the Guardian academies. Maya had learned to use her platform for something far more meaningful than personal fame. As she and Helena walked back toward the academy buildings, where dozens of young Guardians were studying interdimensional theory and practicing defensive techniques, Maya felt the deep contentment that came from knowing her life had true purpose. The viral selfie that had started it all was still online, still shared daily by people who found it fascinating or terrifying. But Maya knew the real story, not the ghost in the background of a social media post, but the century-long love story between Helena and Thomas, the desperate courage of isolated guardians holding impossible lines, and the power of ordinary people to protect extraordinary things. Helena Whitmore had finally come home, not to her own time, but to a future where her sacrifice had meaning and her loneliness was ended. And Maya Chen had found something more valuable than internet fame, a friendship that would last for eternity and a purpose that would protect countless worlds. In the crystalline heart of the ancient grove, the nexus pulsed with steady rhythm, its light reaching across dimensions to touch every guardian post on Earth. The network was strong, the barriers held firm, and the future was bright with possibility. The bride missing since 1920 had not only been found, she had become the foundation for humanity's greatest act of collective protection, and the influencer who had captured her image had discovered that some stories are too important to be reduced to viral content, some mysteries too profound to be solved with a single photograph, and some friendships too powerful to be confined to a single dimension. The Guardian stood watch, the barriers held strong, and the world was safe for another generation to discover the magic and responsibility of protecting the boundaries between what is and what could be.